Is it only physical assault that constitutes domestic violence? Depriving a woman of money or her property, would that be domestic violence? What about marital rape? Watch this video to know what in law constitutes domestic violence. Hi, I'm Advocate Alisha Dujrej Falcao, and this is my channel where I will be telling you all you need to know about the laws that matter. As mentioned in my previous video, the first subject I will be covering in this law series is the law on domestic violence in India. In this video, I will explain to you the meaning and definition of domestic violence under the law, and I will also give you examples of what acts would constitute domestic violence. Now, this is important because the protection and remedies afforded to women under the law can only be availed if a woman has been subjected to domestic violence. Besides, some people may not know that their conduct constitutes domestic violence, and that could land them in trouble. But before we get into the meaning and definition of the law, let me give you a brief background of the law. As you all know, throughout history, women were considered to be weak and have been vulnerable to exploitation. Violence was accepted as something that happens to women, and abuse at home was the worst because it was seldom reported, and in the absence of any law, there was hardly any recourse to take action. It was in the year 1989 that a committee of the United Nations recommended that its member states should act to protect women from violence of any kind, and especially that occurring within the family. With a view to give effect to these recommendations and also keeping in mind the fundamental rights guaranteed under Articles 14, 15 and 21 of the Constitution of India, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005 was enacted. This law came into force on 26 October 2006 and is a giant step in the realization of the goal to completely eliminate all sorts of harassment, cruelty and abuse of a woman at her household by her relative. This act for the first time recognizes the right of a woman to a violence-free home. Prior to the passing of this legislation, the options available to an abused wife were either to file for divorce under civil law or to take recourse to criminal prosecution under criminal law for cruelty or dowry-related issues. But it had its shortcomings, and there were plenty of it. Take for instance, if a woman did not want a divorce, or if the cruelty was not connected to any demand for dowry, the law stopped short of providing effective redress. Also, cruelty punishable under Section 498A of the IPC was attracted only if a woman is married. So there was no adequate protection for the other women in the house. So with the passing of this law, a void was filled, and it reflects in the broad definition given to domestic violence under Section 3 of the Act. Let me now take you straight to Section 3 of the Act. Section 3 of the Act provides what constitutes domestic violence. It recognizes 4 categories of domestic violence: physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, and economic abuse. Physical abuse is defined to mean any act or conduct which is of such a nature as to cause bodily pain, harm or danger to life, limb or health, or impair the health or development of the woman, and includes assault, criminal intimidation, and criminal force. Some of the obvious examples of physical abuse would be slapping, beating, kicking, punching, scratching, or even throwing objects at a woman. But the definition of physical abuse would also encompass instances such as not giving food or proper nutrition, depriving sleep, damaging the vehicle or equipment used by the woman just to make things difficult for her. Assault, criminal intimidation, and criminal force are all defined under the Indian Penal Code. Under the definition of assault in the Indian Penal Code, even a gesture or preparation can amount to assault. Section 351 of IPC provides an interesting illustration. A begins to unloose the muzzle of a ferocious dog, intending that he may thereby cause Z to believe that he is about to cause the dog to attack Z. A has committed an assault upon Z. So, as you may have noticed, it is not only actual harm or injury that is necessary to constitute domestic violence, but even gestures or preparation of certain acts suggesting that harm is intended can constitute domestic violence. Likewise, under the definition of criminal intimidation under Section 503 of the Indian Penal Code, even a threat to the woman's reputation or the reputation of any person in whom the woman is interested is covered if such threat is with intent to cause alarm to the woman or to cause her to do any act which she is not legally bound to do or not to do any act which she is legally entitled to do as the means of avoiding the execution of such threat. Explanation given under the section states that even a threat to injure the reputation of any deceased person in whom the woman is interested is covered within the meaning of the section. Not only threat to injure reputation, but also threat of injury to the woman or injury to her property is also criminal intimidation. For example, threat to injure the reputation of a woman or of her father just to force her to sign certain documents which she is not legally bound to sign would constitute criminal intimidation. Also, threat to shave her head or damage her vehicle just to prevent her from going to work the next day would be criminal intimidation and would constitute domestic violence by physical abuse. In this section, I will explain to you what is sexual abuse and verbal and emotional abuse. Sexual abuse is defined to include any conduct of a sexual nature that abuses, humiliates, degrades, or otherwise violates the dignity of a woman. Marital rape, although not a criminal offence in India, but it would still come within the meaning of sexual abuse for the purpose of constituting domestic violence. Also, certain other acts such as using sexual insults against a woman, forcing her to wear revealing clothes, or exposing a woman to public would all be acts of sexual abuse. Verbal and emotional abuse is defined to include insults, ridicule, humiliation, name-calling, especially with regard to not having a child or a male child, or repeated threats to cause physical pain to any person in whom the woman is interested. Mocking a woman, humiliating a woman by reason of her skin tone or build, threatening to kidnap her children or torture her children, or accusing her of cheating would all be examples of verbal and emotional abuse. One of the most important facets of domestic violence is economic abuse. It is not uncommon for a woman to be made to bend to the will of the dominant male by reasons of financial and economic pressure. Economic abuse under the Domestic Violence Act includes depriving a woman of financial resources to which she is entitled. So, depriving a woman of money for maintenance or her upkeep or for children, or depriving a woman of medical facilities would also amount to economic abuse. Certain acts such as hiding her jewelry or hiding her important documents would constitute domestic violence by way of economic abuse. Also, depriving a woman of her stridhan or property owned by her, whether jointly or separately, amounts to economic abuse. Even depriving her payment of rent of the shared household also amounts to economic abuse. Disposing household effects, alienating assets, movable or removable, valuable such as shares, securities, bonds or other property in which the woman has any interest or is entitled to use by virtue of the domestic relationship also amounts to economic abuse. Likewise, prohibiting or restricting a woman to continued access to resources or facilities which she is entitled to use or enjoy by virtue of the domestic relationship, including access to the shared household, also amounts to economic abuse. The definition of domestic violence also provides that even mere threats to do any of the acts that I have mentioned thus far would amount to domestic violence. The law has also provided some protection to men against misuse of the act within the section itself. Explanation 2 of the section provides that whether any act, commission, conduct, omission would constitute domestic violence under the law would be considered on the basis of the overall facts and circumstances of the case. So, if the overall facts and circumstances of the case do not suggest an intentional victimization of the woman, the law may not deem an isolated act to be one of domestic violence. So let me briefly summarize what we have learned today. The definition of domestic violence is wide and all-encompassing. That it is not only actual harm or injury that is necessary to constitute domestic violence, but even acts that are capable of causing harm or injury would constitute domestic violence. Threats can amount to domestic violence. It is not only acts of physical abuse that is domestic violence, but even acts of sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, and economic abuse that would constitute domestic violence. that the acts of domestic violence need not be directed only against a woman, but can also be directed against a person in whom she has an interest, for example, her family members, her children, or her employer, etc. So this is it on the legal definition of domestic violence under the law. In my next video, I will tell you who can be an aggrieved person under the law, and I will also tell you how it is not only men but also women who are liable under the law. If you like my video and think my channel will be of help to you, then do subscribe to my channel. You can also like, share and click on the bell icon so you don't miss out on any of my videos. See you soon.